I've come to the point that we actually need more revolution than evolution. Like the Industrial Revolution replaced human slavery, and we had a whole different system with the fossil-driven era.
Right.
We now need a revolution to a totally different era, and where growth itself no longer is the primary driver, and because human behavior has become so focused on competitiveness around that growth and like gross domestic product, it just motivates all the wrong behaviors from a human point of view, and I think we're much better than that as a humanity.
That was Charles Perry, Director of Sustainable Future for All, and we chatted with him at the Conduit Club in London the day after the Climate Impact Summit, which you might have heard some clips of in the last episode. If not, you should really check it out. Some great panel discussions, and we revisit a couple of those in our chat with Charles. So why are we doing this conversation? I mean, it's fair to say that there's some headwinds across the kind of climate tech, sustainability, and clean energy space at the moment, no matter where you are. So that's why I wanted to talk to Charles, who went from working on South Africa's democratic transition to being founding director of BP's first stab at renewables, to working with Al Gore and now advising companies and nonprofits on various things. People who've stayed the course, like Charles, no matter the weather, having setbacks and having to change tack for sure, but persevering. I think there's something to be learned from people who've done that over the course of decades. And not everybody would agree with all of his choices. Was it right to work for BP at that time and try to move them in the direction that their chairman said that they wanted to go? I think that, it's hard to say no. It's hard to say that that was not worth trying. And I think what's interesting about his arc is where he's landed, because that through line in his career, I think, has been to sound a bit of a warning based a lot on where he came from. In 2012, he did a BBC interview with John Sopel, and we clipped that during the episode, where he compares the need to get off fossil fuels to ending slavery, which got a reaction, as you might expect. But those kind of changes in political economy don't usually happen without a fight. And consequently, he gets a bit personal. He talks about how that those early experiences kind of shaped why he kept going in the direction he did. And look, I was born in New York, and until recently, would have found it pretty difficult to identify with the kinds of reckoning that someone who grew up in Germany, like Tajua Müller, our friend, who we've talked on the show a number of times with, or someone who grew up in apartheid South Africa and was a beneficiary of the regime, like Charles, and what that would have done. What choices would you make? How do you deal with that? And being an American outside of America for a long time now, I'm not in the kind of boiling frog situation. I've had a little more time and space to see these changes that have built up over time. And therefore, I can also see that there will come a point where Americans of good conscience are going to have to do the same kind of work in reconciling the things that were being done in their name with what they decided to do about it when they had the chance. So that's a bit heavy, but don't worry, the conversation is not. The conversation is Charles is a great raconteur and just a great hang. So it was real fun to have a good chance to sit down with him at the Conduit Club, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. And we appreciate you checking out Wicked Problems. We'd love to continue this work with your help. Independent media is a tough gig at the best times. This is a more challenging time, and we appreciate anything you can do to help us keep going, whether it's subscribing, whether it's liking a post, whether it's actually becoming a member at wickedproblems.earth, sharing with somebody you think might get something out of it, or even hitting that buy a coffee button on our post. We do appreciate you. Thanks. We're here with Charles Perry, multi-decade veteran of the climate and sustainability space. You've had such a varied career. Thank you for coming on Wicked Problems.
It's a pleasure. So great to see you twice in 2 days.
And we were just yesterday at the Climate Impact Summit, Steve Murphy's event, and you were sharing something with a former guest on the show, Stephen Mearsman from Zenobi. So it was a great event. I thought
He did very well. That panel was very inspiring.
And also I thought it was challenging as well. There wasn't just happy talk.
Yeah.
It was acknowledging the real challenges.
Yeah, because we had such a mixture of skills and experiences being shared. Corporate lawyer, venture capital firm, entrepreneur, and then a real sort of Standard & Poor's rating guy.
Yes. No, it was a really good event, and I think it was something that came up as part of the kind of crosstalk between you and Stephen that kind of made me want to reach out, because I've been meaning to try to get you on for a while. But both of you were sort of comparing notes about Al Gore. And in particular bowling, from Stephen's part anyway. But yeah, so for people who don't know all about your background, maybe, like the anecdote you told yesterday about your time with Al Gore.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been so associated with this in so many different ways over the years, in BP, in consultancy, in working with Al Gore. So what made you decide to work in this space in the first place, really?
Yeah.
Having started out entirely in public life in a completely different way in South Africa.
It was that. It was actually starting out being involved in social justice in South Africa. So when I was at university in America, I joined the anti-apartheid movement, and I majored in political science, conflict resolution in divided societies, and the only thing I cared about was getting rid of apartheid. So I made a beeline back to South Africa at any possible moment. In 1990, I spent 6 months at the University of Cape Town on transfer in the African Political Science Department, doing research for my thesis, but also I was there when Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Island. And he was actually released from Victor Verster, but he had been in prison for 27 years.
Wow.
And I was 10 feet away from him when he made his first speech as a free man.
That must have left an impression.
Very much so. And then he went from prisoner to president in exactly 4 years.
Wow.
And I had gone back to Brown University. I'd graduated in 92. And I then went straight back to South Africa, got a job with the Independent Electoral Commission, organizing the first democratic elections. And of course, he came to power. So we had the huge victory party. I mean, I was independent, but of course, no sooner had he won than I got on board, and we had a major victory party at the Carlton Hotel, where I met, most of the leaders of the struggle, who I had always, seen in books or read about, and those were books that were unbanned in America. The books that I read in America were banned in South Africa.
Right,
Yeah.
of course. That must have been an experience at Brown of kind of having things you thought you knew about the world turned out to be slightly different. So how did that take me from that to climate? How did that? What's the connection?
It took a while. So initially, it was around the rebirth of South Africa with President Mandela in power and celebrating what it meant to be the new South Africa, right? And so I got interested in models of sustainability around what's good socially, environmentally, and economically. And then I started finding out about the theory of sustainability and the Brundtland Commission that in 92 at the Earth Summit defined sustainability in that way, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Started looking into Gro Brundtland, who was the Prime Minister of Norway who chaired the Brundtland Commission, and thinking, actually, there's something I could work with here, because I realized that with this new model, if we then tried to implement that model both in the private sector and the public sector, then we could actually do some transformation.
Right. And that led you at some point to meeting Al Gore, but of course you mentioned you met Al Gore before then.
I met Al Gore at President Mandela's inauguration, but I didn't know he was an environmentalist. Right. And and again, all I was thinking about was, the political situation in South Africa. And what was fascinating about meeting him when he was vice president, and he was there with First Lady Hillary Clinton and his wife, Tipper Gore, plus an entourage of amazing people, Quincy Jones and Danny Glover, etc., was that I was struck by meeting him just because he was the vice president. But then I started looking into him after that, and I realized that he had written this book, Earth in the Balance, while he was in office. And so I read that book, and then I thought, my God, he's an environmentalist. And then it started all coming together because I'd also got interested in the collision between people and planet when I was backpacking around India prior to getting the job with the Independent Electoral Commission.
Right.
And so there was something about, okay, there's the South African situation, but then on a more macro scale, what do we do with, how do we motivate harmonious living between people and planet?
And I mean, for me, it's what's been interesting about how you've been a front row seat, really, for how it has changed the way people have thought about these issues. From the Earth Summit, from '92 through to Kyoto and beyond. And it seems to me that one of the biggest changes over the course of that time, which has been both kind of like fuel for the movement and also has led to some complications, is this fusion of justice and environmental concerns in ways that were kind of novel in the way it kind of evolved, as opposed to kind of an older Theodore Roosevelt type outdoorsman type conservative approach to preserving the environment, whereas the justice issues that come around when you start getting into the impacts from burning fossil fuels just change the conversation.
Absolutely.
I mean, so any observations on like that process, and do you think it's also maybe led to some unforeseen consequences in opening up the kind of critiques that we're now seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, because the climate crisis is a human rights crisis, right? And the people being most affected by climate crisis are the people who are already suffering on the edges of society and in vulnerable places, like in Bangladesh, in the lowest areas where sea level rises are having a major impact on millions and millions of people. And so stringing all of this together, because it's a connected web. I mean, we know that from the stories of The Lion King and from Chief Seattle saying life is a web, and if you touch one string, one strand, it's going to affect the whole web. So we kind of know that implicitly, but for me it took, since you mentioned him, it took Vice President Al Gore to really make that clear to us in a very compelling way through the Inconvenient Truth narrative. And so even though I met him in '94 at President Mandela's inauguration, I then sought him out later on. Right. And what was very lucky is when I was running renewable energy at BP in 2006, he was invited to speak at Tomorrow's Company in London, and I was invited by BP to go to that. And I was straight out the doors to go and see him, and I wondered whether he'd remember me from '94. Of course he did, actually, which was quite surprising. I mean, the guy's got the most extraordinary memory, he really does. And so we just headed off again, and I'd actually written on the back of my BP business card, Vice President, where should I send my CV? Then I said to him, it's a bit awkward, but I actually have written something on the back of my business card. So he looked at it and he smiled, and he called his colleague from Generation Investment Management, Colin Leduc, who helped them build David Blood and Al Gore, Blood and Gore, build that business. And he said, Charles, meet Colin. And by the way, Colin's half South African. And just stay in touch with Colin and he'll tell you what we're up to. And so it was Colin that sent me the email saying, are you interested in applying to go and spend a week with him in Nashville, Tennessee in January 2007. Wow. I spent that week with Al Gore and Dr. Jim Hansen in Nashville. And there were 150 of us, 148 Americans and 2 foreigners, myself and a wonderful friend of mine, Scottish guy, Evan Williams. And then we co-founded Climate Reality UK to spread the word. We had the rights to use his material after that training course. And he encouraged us to basically just get out there and start giving the slideshow. So I gave hundreds of slideshows of an Inconvenient Truth.
And again, at that time, at that meeting, handing over that business card, you've kind of just slipped it in there. We haven't really touched on it. And again, I'm appreciative we don't have an endless amount of time. But how did you get the BP gig? I mean, it's quite a...
The BP gig on my MBA at Cranfield, full-time MBA, I was looking to take sustainability into an organization where I could make a difference, right? And so I'd become familiar with the model from South Africa, and we haven't talked about what I then did after President Mandela's inauguration. I got involved with, we created this new model of sustainability in the Cape, Western Cape, in hospitality and leisure. It's called Spear, and it's become quite well known and a big leisure destination. And we experimented with lots of things around the social case, the environmental case, and the economic case. So on the MBA, I wanted to think, where could I take that? And I thought of BP and Ford, because of Bill Ford and John Brown. They were the only two big captains of industry that were talking about climate change and other existential threats to our business as usual.
Right.
And so I went to BP, and I sort of knocked the door down, because they didn't come to my business school, Cranfield, in those days. They just went to Harvard and INSEAD. And I knocked the door down and said, no, I want to come and work for you, inspired by John Brown and the idea of becoming more than an oil and gas company, and seeing if we could become, personally, I wanted to just become a green energy company, the first global green energy company. And so we did, my first job there was to, we did the sun with Beyond Petroleum, the Helios.
Yes. No. I've heard tell of the many meetings where that came out. I mean, again, sort of jump around a little bit, but I suppose I kind of am obligated to ask. Obviously, BP's strategy has changed quite a lot since
Backwards, keep going backwards. Yeah.
I mean, it's
like drill baby drill with Trump.
I mean, I suppose do you think that that's an irreversible kind of like falling back to earth process that they're in?
The political leaders of the day set the tone for businesses like BP to follow, right? So as soon as you get a Trump saying drill baby drill, then people will say, well, that's what we're going to do, and we're not going to do any of the green stuff because we're not going to be rewarded for the green stuff, and we're beholden to our shareholders. And with most of the assets being in North America, they're like, okay, we just follow the direction that the president sets. And they did the same with George Bush Jr. They just pulled a whole lot of the stuff that we were doing when George Bush Jr. beat Al Gore, right? So it's sort of par for the course, unfortunately. And you would think that they would step out and show, true differentiated leadership, because the opportunity for a well-known oil and gas company with a great backstory like BP to be the first global green energy company would have been enormous. I mean, Ørsted was nowhere when we were driving renewables at BP. We were the biggest renewable energy company in the world in 2006. And then Ørsted, which was Dong, Danish oil and gas, they just leapfrogged us, and now they're 99% renewable.
But as the worm has turned, of course, then they've had their own challenges due to
that's true.
Reading this morning.
And this is the thing as to whether you then, because effectively it's hard to try and do both oil and gas and renewables within the same culture. And I found when I was doing renewables that the oil and gas guys were working against me. And in fact, the corporate affairs guys were always lobbying for more subsidies and support for fossil fuels, when I was saying, hang on guys, already there's 6 times more for fossil fuels than for renewables, so can we turn the tables?
Right. But since then, I mean, and having then worked with Al Gore and then worked in the space, I mean, just given we've only got a couple minutes, because I appreciate you've got a busy day ahead of you still, a couple of questions I wanted to ask. One was a small question. What do you think we've gotten right over the last, since that time? And then I have a follow-up question.
Okay, the answer to that's pretty simple. We've pioneered a sustainability movement that is now mainstream. It's unstoppable. So the sustainability revolution is unstoppable, despite what Trump and Musk are trying to do.
Why do you think it's unstoppable?
Because it's a movement like the civil rights movement or the anti-apartheid movement or the suffragettes. It's a movement that has now caught the imagination because people have realized how important this issue is.
Right.
And most people, take the UK, most people here know that climate change is a major threat. And they want to do something about it. I mean, yes, there's an argument about how and at what cost and how fast, because there's a backlash at the moment because people think Britain has done too much too quickly, and now we're at a competitive disadvantage. I would say it's exactly the opposite. This is the best commercial opportunity that Britain has seen since pioneering the Industrial Revolution.
Well, and I think there was a rather famous interview that you'd given with John Sopel back in 2012.
The economies of the world are in such a parlous state. No one is going to want to do that. It's interesting, isn't it, the extent to which kind of the green agenda is talked about so much less since the banking crisis, for example?
Well, we have to look back in history. I mean, in 1800, of course, the economy of the world depended on human slavery, human energy. But through the works of William Wilberforce and Abraham Lincoln, we decided to abolish slavery. We decided it wasn't the right thing to do to have slavery. The Stone Age, I might just add...
You're not drawing a... Hang on. Well, you're not drawing a parallel between the moral unacceptability of slavery and the moral unacceptability of burning fossil fuels.
Well, the irony of this is actually what replaced slavery was the industrialized era. So fossil fuels replaced slavery. And at the time, the captains of industry, like the British East India Company, Charles Grant was the chief executive. He argued you couldn't abolish slavery, he said to William Wilberforce, it'll ruin the world's economy. But William Wilberforce managed to persuade Charles Grant to agree that there was a better way. And guess what the better way was? Fossil fuels.
Where you made the comparison between, kind of dropped in there between fossil fuel and the anti-slavery movement, or sustainability movement.
Yeah, because when the economic and the moral case converges, well, then you have to have a better way, right? And luckily, in both the slavery example, there was a better way because the steam engine had been invented. So we could mechanize instead of using human energy and move into the industrial age. And it was obvious that it was morally repugnant to carry on the way the British East India Company and other organizations were. But that was the norm prior to that, right? Now the norm in the Industrial Revolution became obviously fossil fuels. But when you've got 8 billion people burning 1 million years worth of fossilized matter every week, then you realize that, hang on, this can't go on forever. It's unsustainable. So then what replaces fossil fuels? Well, it's definitely the sustainability revolution based on decentralized clean energy systems with robotics and AI, as brilliantly put in Rethink X's new work, Stella.
Well, then that was my exit question. I want to come back to that one, but one last thing: what we do wrong? What should have been done? What challenge did we fail to actually address? And I suspect that the grid might have something to do with it.
Yeah, well, the grid being
broader infrastructure piece.
The energy dimension is problematic because with fossil fuels we became so reliant on a system of molecules being generated far away from where they're consumed, and this inefficient, by today's standards, infrastructure, where then you have electrons with renewables, and that grid infrastructure can't work anymore.
Right.
You have major balancing problems, hence we started a business called GridServe to do energy balancing, but also you want to have the generation near the consumption embedded in the community, which is why you need embedded generation, which is also known as decentralized energy.
Right. I suppose that's an area that I guess we kind of keep going in fits and starts in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where there's potentially a lot of potential for gain.
And it really helps if the government, whether that be a national government or a local government or a regional government, can champion that model, because it's a very different model from the last 250 years of having a centralized energy model.
And now at the moment, you've been doing a lot of work, supporting up-and-coming companies, about working with people who are trying to solve for some of these challenges. I know that you mentioned Rethink X, basically that Stellar, this new book out with Jamie Arbib and his co-author Tony
Sieber.
Yep. And I've had a good chance to hear him yesterday at the event, but also read the book. It's fascinating, kind of interesting moment in abundance discourse, which I think this touches on a lot.
Yeah.
So what brought you to be working with these guys at the think tank, and what do you hope to achieve?
Well, a mutual friend said, you've got to meet Jamie Arbib. You guys will get on so well because you're both coming at this from slightly different angles, but you both know it's about system change. And they're, Rethink X is a system change think tank, and they've done amazing work. And now it's a question of, really accelerating that system change. And I've been all about the transformation and thinking about things like, reading books on, can we evolve capitalism? Or do we need to have more of a revolution than an evolution? And I've come to the point that we actually need more revolution than evolution. Like the Industrial Revolution replaced human slavery, and we had a whole different system with the fossil-driven era.
Right.
We now need a revolution to a totally different era, and where growth itself no longer is the primary driver, and because human behavior has become so focused on competitiveness around that growth and like gross domestic product, it just motivates all the wrong behaviors from a human point of view, and I think we're much better than that as a humanity.
Well, I hope you're right. I suppose time will tell. The last thing before I let you go, because I appreciate you've got a busy day ahead of you still, but the last question we like to ask someone as eminent yourself who comes on this show is, are there 3 things we call them catalysts, that have influenced how you see the world, and maybe even things that have helped change how you see the world over the... It could be anything, books, TVs,
The
shows.
first is being inspired by leaders that you admire. So for me, Nelson Mandela, definitely. Al Gore, definitely. We've spoken about him as well. And then I would say, sort of business leaders who really seize the mantle. And one that struck me a while ago, and I was lucky enough to meet him in London. He's no longer with us, but he's called Ray Anderson, and he was the founder and chief executive of Interface.
Right.
And he wrote a book called Confessions of a Radical Industrialist, and he brilliant story about how he finally saw the challenge around pollution, and leading a heavy industry manufacturing company, he set his whole team the task of making it a mission zero company. So that's one. So I think, reading, being inspired by actual live examples of leadership and case studies, looking around for models that one can replicate and scale, and then unlocking capital. So, at the moment, that's my big thing, is trying to work with asset owners on unlocking capital at scale.
Right. Well, and I think you mentioned, I think we were here discussing a little bit earlier, there's also a film, I think, that influenced you. And
yeah, there's a few, but certainly one of them was Cry Freedom, which gutted me when I first saw it, because it showed me up close, the true horrors of apartheid South Africa, which I'd grown up in, which I was not. I was shocked by, and because I was indoctrinated as a young person, and I'm very sensitive about indoctrination as a result of that. And I think we've got a big problem at the moment with indoctrination through media barons that have an agenda, and they've bought up a lot of the media channels, so they're really working hard to brainwash us. And I was totally brainwashed as a youngster, and I had to kind of unlearn a lot of stuff. And I thank the education my parents provided, and Brown University in particular, for helping me unlock that and read everything voraciously, and then sort of relearn it, and then try and sort of address my failures as a person, my weaknesses from that indoctrination background.
Well, and also that means also support your local independent climate media like Wicked Problems. So, Charles Perry, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Real pleasure to talk to you.
You too.
When I try to sleep at night, I can only dream in red. The outside world is black and white, with only one color dead. Oh, be cold, be cold, because be cold. Oh, be cold, because be cold. Hear the murder, the man is dead, the man is dead. You can blow out a candle, but you can't blow out a fire. Once the flames begin to catch, the wind will blow it higher. Oh, be cold, because be cold.
Thanks for listening to Wicked Problems, made possible through the generosity of people like you. If you liked this conversation, please share it and leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps people find the show. If you'd like an ad-free version of this podcast, consider becoming a paid subscriber at wickedproblems.earth. You'll also get our newsletter, all our show notes, member-only goodies, and you'll be supporting media that wants to tell the stories at the frontier of climate tech, the place where people and politics, technology and capital meet and shape the future. And whether it's one you'd want to live in. Wicked Problems is written and edited by Richard Delavan. Production assistance was provided by me, Theodore Delavan. Wicked Problems, Climate Tech Conversations, is a production of Wicked Problems Limited.